A société civile immobilière is a legal structure used primarily in France for the management and ownership of real estate. It is created to own, manage and sometimes transfer real estate assets. It enables several people, associates, to collectively own real estate. A société civile immobilière requires a minimum of 2 partners, for example, a couple. It may be subject to income tax or corporation tax. For income tax, you're directly subject to taxation as an individual. And according to the law of territoriality, the income you receive in France for your rents will be taxed in France. There is a specific scale for non-resident. An English resident would be taxed based on these tax brackets. If your rents do not exceed 27,478 euros in 2024, you will be taxed at the rate of 20%. But above this amount, you will be taxed at the rate of 30% for the amount exceeding these 27,478 euros. The sociétés civiles immobilières, which are subject to corporate income tax, are generally useful to manage a whole bunch of buildings and separating assets in order to obtain different tax treatment for different rental properties. What happens if the property you've bought and rented generates rental income of 700 euros per month? Say differently, 8,400 euros rent for a year. In terms of taxation for the société immobilière with income tax, we will have 2 options. First option, the microfoncier tax system, which applies to total gross income of less than 15,000 euros per year. This system offers a 30% allowance on this income. The 70% remaining is taxed in France at the rate of 20%. If your annual rental income exceeds 15,000 a year, you're no longer entitled to use this very specific microfoncier tax regime. In this case, you can switch to the régime réel. The régime réel does not allow you to apply a 30% allowance, but instead it does allow you to deduct a number of expenses from the rent you received. Here are the charges you can deduct. Rental management expenses, maintenance and repair costs, work-related expenses, loan interest expenses, insurance, property tax, and finally, condominium expenses. Once the 30% allowance has been deducted if you are on the microfoncier scheme, or once deductible expenses has been deducted if you are on the régime réel scheme, the remaining figure is your taxable income, and it is on this figure that you will be taxed at the rate of 20% for total annual income of less than 27,478 euros and at the rate of 30% for rental income in excess of this amount. Here is an example for the 2 different tax regimes. On the left, microfoncier, and on the right, régime réel. As you can see on the left-hand side with the microfoncier regime, your rental income is 8,400 euros minus the 30% allowance, which lets you with a taxable income of 5,880 euros. Now, on your right-hand side with the régime réel, your rental income is also 8,400 euros, but you can deduct credit repayment 4,200, property tax 900, repairs general fees for 1,000 euros, agency fees for 1,000 euros, and finally your taxable income is only 1,300 euros. Only under the régime réel you can carry forward any losses. For example, if your annual rental income is about 8,400 euros, but you incur 9,000 euros in charges for repairs to the property, the loss you incur will not be taxed and can be deducted from future profit. You can deduct this deficit over the following 10 years. In our example, with a deficit of 600 euros, if the following year you achieve a profit of plus 3,000 euros, you will be able to deduct the 600 from this profit, and the final taxable income will be 2,400 euros. Your rental income generated in France will be declared on your annual tax return in England and will be taxed at the rate that corresponds to your income in England. Here is the English tax scale at the times of this video's creation. Then, if you earn £35,000 a year from your job, the rents you receive in France will be taxed in the UK in bracket number 2 at the rate of 20%. However, the tax you paid in France, excluding social security contributions, can be deducted from what you have to pay in the UK. And this is because there is a tax treaty between France and England to avoid double taxation. Taking the previous example, in England, you will have to declare 8,400 euros of rent received, but you've already paid 20% of the rents in tax in France. As the rate of taxation is 20% in France and 20% in England in this example, because of the income of the example and because we are in 2024, you won't pay anything more in England. Note that you can only deduct the taxes, not social security contribution, that are not considered as taxes. Really important in your calculations. Which means the part of 17.2% that represent social contribution in France won't be deductible from the taxes you have to pay in England because they are not considered as taxes. And this is a very, very important part you have to take into account in your calculation before any investment. In this type of rental investment, do not forget in your calculation that you also have the repayment of the mortgage on the property you are renting out, as well as expenses such as maintenance, repairs, and property tax. Let's come back on our example. We suppose that as a rental income, you made 8,400 for the whole year, but you have to repay the loan, 4,200. We'll have to pay property tax, around 900, probably have general fees like repairs, let's say 1,000, and agency fees 1,000. Your taxable income will be 1,300 euros. You will have to pay French taxes for 260. You will have to pay social contribution, 223.60 euros. In total receipts are 8,400, but total disbursements are 7,583 euros. Your real net cash gain is 816 euros. It may seem like you're losing out in the short term, but the tenant is actually paying you part of the mortgage each year during the whole period. So when you resell the property, you will realize a real capital gain. Now, if the property is not resold and the loan is paid in full, you will actually receive a positive cash flow. Finally, under French tax law, if you keep the property 22 years, you won't pay any taxes when you resell it on the profit you make. You only pay a small portion of social security contribution. If you keep the property 30 years, you won't pay neither social contribution nor taxes. Nothing. The entire capital gain will be yours. In a nutshell, in the form of Société Civile Immobilière, two different tax regimes will be of interest for you. The microfoncier system, which deducts 30% of the rental income, leaving you to pay taxes and social security contribution on the 70% remaining only. The régime réel, which allows you to deduct more if expenses are high in order to reduce your taxable income and minimize your tax and your social contribution. Finally, you can deduct in the UK the amount of tax you've already paid in France. Finally, if you keep the property for 30 years, you can resell it, make a gain in capital, and have zero taxes and zero social contributions to pay.